closed session.
Oh, sorry.
Can we have a report out of closed session?
He's grabbing his chair.
I need my glasses. It's a little hot there.
Yes, sir. We talked about a leave request for retirement and negotiations.
That's fine.
We approved the leave request and retirement. We allowed a proration for the retirement incentive for one of our classified.
Okay. The next item is public comment on consent agenda items. Any public comment? Yes, sir.
Can I make a quick comment? I misunderstood the schedule, and I just had one thing to say on the closed session there. Is that all right?
Well, I mean, it's like sort of the cat's out of the bag, and we've already held the closed session, but.
Did the schedule get changed? I apologize for being late and missing it.
And you are, sir?
Sure.
Okay, and what do you have to say?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment on the negotiations. I'm kind of worried about things. I feel like, what's being offered to us isn't that much. I feel like with what I've understood, there's going to be a lot taken away next year. If we're going to be making, $2,500 less is going to be taken out of us. It's come to my attention. I don't know a lot about this stuff, but I do know that, there's $2 million in reserves and $600,000 is what needs to be there. If each teacher in the school, got a 5% increase, that's $300,000. That leaves, 1.1 million still above the 600,000 that you need. I mean, we're incredibly underpaid here in this county, one of the lowest paid districts in the county. I mean, and for what we're going to be giving up for this 1.5% increase that's being offered, I mean, we're not even going to see it in our paychecks. For me, I'm a third-year teacher here, and I'm surprised you don't know about me. I mean, I hear a lot of feedback. I taught Georgianne's son. Mark knows me well. A lot of people speak a lot of highly things about me. So, if you guys are trying to retain teachers like me, more things need to be offered. I mean, because I can barely afford it is to live, let alone start a family here in this county. So I'm just hoping that's going to be thought about. I don't feel enough's really being offered to us teachers, and that's why I was here to voice my opinion. So thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Any other comment on closed session? On the consent agenda, excuse me. Hearing none, we'll move on to what's left to do. The consent agenda, so do we have
I'll make a motion to approve.
okay, so that would be approval of the winter release consolidated application reporting system, and then approval of the investment report.
You're approving the consent agenda?
Yes.
Okay,
So those are the two items in the consent agenda. Do we have a second on that?
I'll second it.
thank
Okay.
you.
Any public discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? So the next item is second interim report approval. I just received this tonight.
Yes, that's literally hot off the presses.
Okay, so is there any requirement that we approve this tonight?
Yes, so the second interim is due to the county office on March 15th.
Uh-huh. And what happens if we don't send it to them on March 15th?
I have never taken that path, so
Uh-huh.
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean.
Remember, this is just a snapshot of where we're at.
Right.
It's not our final budget or our audit.
Yeah, well, I'm planning on going through it real carefully, because I'm interested where we are and stuff. I don't, are we have any kind of a presentation on it, or are we
Yeah,
just?
we're going to go through and talk about
Okay,
where we're at. And
all right. Proceed.
let me just preface a few things. Financially, we're about where we thought we would be. There aren't any giant surprises. There's been no big increase, no big decrease. We're about where we thought we would be. The difference is, Nikki's only been here since January, and between January and the 1st of March, when we have to have this all put together, is a pretty short learning curve. So I'm comfortable our numbers are good, but as far as knowing the budget and knowing in and out, you know, she's not there yet, nor should she be. That's a short window of time. We also have some issues with, we've changed things of what we spend and where we spend. For example, we're spending a whole lot less in legal this year. We're spending a lot less in contracted services from vendors like WUSD and those people. We have spent more in facility repair, and we've spent more in transportation. So those are some of the issues. We went 1-to-1, but that money was covered through LCAP and our grant of our high school for college readiness. So you know, we're trying to maintain where we're at. And the budget's not greatly different than when Tanya did the first budget for us, but we are spending in different areas because we've been able to now change our focus to priorities.
So we have, I used the same template that I think Tanya used last time, so hopefully that will be familiar to you all. It really restates what's in the main document, but I think it is a little easier to read. So I was going to use that to go through. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them as we go through. I'm thinking the multi-year mark is the easiest thing to look at.
Or the big picture.
The big picture, this narrative just covers the key points related to our fund balance. So in terms of our change in fund balance, we're looking very similar to where we were at first interim. We're seeing that this year maybe is not as much of a negative change in fund balance as it was previously projected, but next year is a little bit more. And that has to do with the fact that the state has changed their projections for revenue. We're seeing a little more this year for revenue and less next year than what they had originally projected for us. But when you look at the 3 years altogether, it's very, very similar for total change in fund balance between the 3 years. And that is the 1.7 million.
And before we get too far into that conversation, 3rd year out is just basically only what we know now. We certainly hope that isn't the real fund, but you can't count on things that aren't there yet. Just like the governor's projecting about a $270,000 cut for our revenue next year. That's not a done deal. We don't know that yet.
And that's not reflected in here.
Well, reduced revenue is in there, but the real issue for us is what's true and what's false. We have to go on what we know now.
There's a couple of areas that we're definitely conservative in, and I'll hit those as we go through some of the bullet points here. So the first thing I will go through is the changes that we saw between first interim and now on unrestricted revenues. So
can you point us to the page?
Yeah, it's just the very first one with bullet
I see,
points.
okay.
So the projections for our LCFF revenue, which is our primary revenue source, increased slightly for current year. It was almost $100,000 more than what we originally projected, although 77,000 of that was specifically supplemental concentration grant funds. So we would identify things through the LCAP process that we would use those funds for. The state also has released some prior year revenue from MAW claims. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that situation, that they had kind of frozen some of those, and as they review and audit them, they're releasing some of the back years. We do not budget for that until we receive those funds. We did receive some, so we increased that budget.
And let me preface that. What you're looking at is Nikki put together anything that there's a significant change in, that's what you're gonna see bulleted here, and the explanation why.
We also updated our revenue to include the mandated cost block grant. That is the one that we can opt in to do the block grant, or we can continue filing the traditional claims. However, the state has had years and years worth of claims that they have not paid on, and so many districts, and ours is one of them, have chosen to do the block grant, which means we're guaranteed a certain amount of funding in the current year.
For unfunded mandates from the state.
Right. So that amount was not previously in our budget, so we updated to include that. And then in our local revenue, we just had some changes to do with some revenue we're expecting from Mendocino College. They participate in a dual enrollment program with us. And then also the city of Willits sent their share of cost for the swimming pool for summer 2016, and that was not previously reflected in the budget. So in our unrestricted expenditures, I've gone through and I've reviewed all of our position control, which is the system we use to manage and keep all of our positions. For all certificated, I'm still in the process of doing that for classified, so by estimated actuals, we'll see that those are also all reviewed. But we did get all of the certificated done. We had some extra duty teacher salary that I believe may have been overstated at first interim. I was not able to identify particular activities that it was going to be used for, so we did reduce that. Updated positions for staff turnover and periods of vacancy. So when we have, late hires or people who resign and there's periods in the middle where there's no one in positions, we've tightened that up for current year. We saw that certificated health and welfare was understated at first interim, so I increased that. And our classified health and welfare and PERS were also updated in relation to those vacancies. So we reduced some of those. And part of our Chromebooks were originally budgeted all in unrestricted, but as Mark mentioned, we ended up using the college readiness block grant for that, so we have moved some of that over to the restricted side of the budget. And we're seeing some increase in utility expense. We removed an election expense, which was originally budgeted for this year, but I think due to the change of the election cycle, we've moved that out into next year. And then also updated the supplemental concentration grant expenses based on the LCAP updates that Mark was referring to. And then we updated the indirect costs in restricted general fund, child development fund, and food service. And we did see a decreased contribution to special education and an increased transfer to food service fund. So that was all of the main changes that we saw on the unrestricted side. On the restricted side, we updated the Medi-Cal revenue and increased revenue from MCOE. We received a grant to help support homeless students, and also updated our other use of facilities and miscellaneous donations revenue, which is typically just budgeted as it's received. We were overstated for our summer school revenue, and so I matched the revenue to the actual expenditures because that summer school took place in the summer of 2016 as part of this fiscal year, so we know the actuals, got that updated. And we also had a receivable at the end of our 15-16 school year for special education, and the books were closed before that was able to be recognized on the 15-16 budget, so we'll have some one-time funds that were recognized in 16-17. I believe around $11,000. We updated position control with all the current employee salary schedule placements. And Title I professional development allocation, just for ease of budgeting, was all listed under certificated salaries, but depending on what it gets used for, sometimes it's, travel expenses or mileage, other things. So as needed, that gets shifted over to that location in the budget. And updated instructional aid salaries for staff turnover and periods of vacancy, and also updated those summer school salaries. Added the expenditures to support the homeless students, that is from the grant that we received from MCOE, and reduced our contribution to special education. Those are the main highlights of the restricted side of the budget. Do you guys have any questions on those changes? And we can look at the multi-year projection.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
The ending fund balance, or unrestricted ending fund balance, is $3.5 million, 3.6 million. Is that what is projected now, or what is projected at the beginning of the year?
That one, if you're looking at the 3573594,
Right.
that is current. So that's as of second interim.
So that's what the reserve is right now.
That's the total reserve.
So that's like money in the bank, not what we're projecting at the end of the year.
No, that is what we are projecting as our ending fund balance,
Okay.
yes.
And
And then
what-
those pieces underneath it are the components of that.
So can you explain what, at the beginning of the year, what we projected as the unrestricted ending fund balance?
I do not have the original budget in front of me. I have just what she had projected at first interim.
Could you get that to me? I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
both the budget and the
Actually,
first.
it may be on our Fund 01 form. Let me take a quick look. I believe that it is.
Okay, first.
So original budget. So original budget, which is the one that was adopted in June, was projecting 2.4 million. And that's the beginning balance. And then projected ending fund balance was 1.8 million. That was as of budget adoption. So then first interim, the ending fund balance was projected at 3.4 million. And then the current one, 3.5 million.
Okay. I don't mean this as a criticism, but just for in the future, and both for the budget and for these interim reports, we should have a page numbering system that's
Okay.
internal, because there's about 15 page 3s in here. But if we could just say, so that you can say to us, turn to page 47.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just not the first time this happened.
President, can I ask a question?
Well, let's get through her report first.
Well, I just want to be clear what that last part was. So at the beginning of the year, we were talking about, the projection was that there'd be 1.8 million in the reserve.
And I believe this is in the packet that you have also.
Okay.
It's the Fund Form 01, page 2.
But now we're projecting that there will be the 4 million in reserve.
Well, it's 3.6 million.
But then there's a restricted also.
This is only unrestricted that we're talking about, yeah.
So the 1.8 was unrestricted, the 2.4 was the total.
No, I'm sorry. So 2.4 was the projected beginning fund balance,
Unrestricted fund balance.
unrestricted. The 1.8 was the projected ending fund balance, unrestricted. And that was that budget adoption.
Okay, so it was projected that we'd have 1.8 million at the beginning of the year.
Right.
But now we're projecting that we'll have 3.573.
Right, and I think that
Okay.
at first interim, you guys may have discussed that because at first interim, the ending fund balance was projected at 3.4. So probably when the books were closed and then they went into first interim.
Just because,
Nikki, can you go to the multi-year projection for briefly?
Sure.
So would you explain the difference between the ending fund balance and the reserve for economic uncertainty?
Certainly. So ending fund balance is the total fund balance projected for the end of the year. Everything that's listed below that is a component of that balance. So the reserve is, it depends on how the district sets their reserve, but typically is seen as a percentage of all general fund expenditures. I think at a previous meeting, I'm thinking at the end of last year, you guys had a discussion regarding fund balance, and at that time, the minimum reserve for a district our size is 3%. So that was set aside, and you additionally set aside a set dollar amount, I believe was in the area of $775,000.
Correct.
So that's what that $1,377,000 is, the actual amount that you guys set between that 3% at that time and that 775. And because I wasn't sure what direction you guys wanted to go with that, I did leave that amount. And you can see then at the bottom in the yellow, there is percentage which tells you in any given year what that percentage is, because as your expenditures change, that percentage will look different.
So what is unassigned?
So unassigned is, we have set aside the reserve for economic uncertainty, and then we've also set aside the $2,500 revolving fund expendable amount. And the unassigned is what is left after that. And we've also have assigned. So if we know that we have upcoming purchases or things that we need to do, we can assign that in the fund balance so that it doesn't kind of get lost in the shuffle of things. Unassigned is what is left after each of those other items is subtracted. So,
And a good example of that would be, we have a really expensive everyday math that we approved for K-5. That's one of those assigned.
But essentially, unassigned and, quote, reserve for economic uncertainties, both of those are monies that have not been assigned to anything yet. Okay.
well, yes, although the reserve for economic uncertainty, from the state's perspective, they don't want you to assign it to anything because it's assigned to, protect you from unforeseen circumstances.
it's like the gas tank, it says you've got 10 miles left to go, but you really have 45 miles to go, but.
But don't try driving it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So, with the multi-year projection, we also have the assumptions included, and I can go through, I'm not gonna hit every single dollar amount that's listed. For anything that's listed for revenue that's per ADA, I told you guys what the per ADA amount is that we are currently projecting. The LCFF revenue, the reason that we did see a little bit of an increase this year is that they increased the gap funding rate. I did not include that MAW reimbursement money that we're seeing in 16-17 in those out years. So you'll see that that federal revenue goes back down a little bit. Local revenue. So there was an insurance claim that occurred, some property damage that had happened. And so in this year, I think we received between $40,000 and $50,000 back from our insurance. And so I made sure to eliminate that in our out years so that we don't overstate that local revenue. In our expenditures, certificated unrestricted was where we saw probably some of the biggest change between first interim and second interim. We of course included step and column, but moved $40,000 from the Title I program. We have some teachers at one of our school sites that are funded with Title I. And we're looking at the Title I allocations, I believe, need to be reviewed because I'm not sure that they are being allocated correctly based on the number of students at each school site who are eligible to receive those funds. And so we may need to make some changes there. And in anticipation of that, we moved some of that teacher's salary over to the unrestricted side of the budget. We also, under the supplemental concentration grant, added 2 FTEs of counselor, which up until now have been under the elementary counseling grant, and that revenue, that funding is ending this year. So that will move into the LCAP. And we also added 1.0 FTE of a music teacher, 1.0 FTE art teacher. And additionally, I think Mark has spoken to you guys about the plan at Sherwood that we're trying to grow there a bit. And so with the new classroom space, we will need another teacher. So we've added 1.0 FTE of teacher for Sherwood.
And that depends on numerical numbers. Because right now we're on 5 sections in 3rd grade, then 4th has 4, and 5th has 4th. So Sherwood's gonna be a plus and minus. It should help the class size, and if it does, we may be able to stay at 4 sections instead of 5. But we'll sort that out when we get down to it. The most important thing is to maintain the class size. And if you look at the difference, for example, on the ending fund balance, I'm not even looking at 18-19 because there's so many unknowns out there we don't know. But if you look at where we go from 3.5 down to 2.9, just remember the cost of doing business next year is about 140,000 in steps on the teacher's contract, about 60,000 in steps on the CSEA. Both groups have retirement increases that are not optional for us. The STRS is going up 1.85%, so that's gonna cost us 100,000. So just doing business next year, exactly like we're doing now, is gonna be about in the neighborhood of 400,000 more. And we're adding some teaching positions to that. So that's how you get your $600,000 swing.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Does that take into consideration the retirees and savings from retirees?
I did include some both on the uncertificated and certificated side.
How many did you include?
I don't know how many FTE. I included the dollar amount. So on unrestricted, 77,873, and then on restricted, 30,417. That's going into next year, and then we included a smaller, more conservative figure for the 3rd year.
But it doesn't include paying out $13,000 per person for healthcare benefits when they retire as a teacher. And employees classifieds when they leave, there's a 5,000. So those aren't in there because we don't know the retirements yet. We know a couple of the certifieds, but it is a plus and a minus.
And then I just had a question. So you talked about 2 FTE put in for counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there were, the last time there seemed to be a lot of concern of the fact that we took away 2 for the counseling grant. I just want, these are
Well,
the
we had
2
to-
that we put back in.
We had to close those
Right.
positions because the grant was
Right,
over.
but these are the same positions in here now paid under our salary.
Correct.
For the 2 that we
And they're
closed
actually
last time.
the same people who
Right.
are in Blosser right now and
Okay.
I
there.
I think one of the ones that we were discussed last time was classified, and these are both certificates.
Oh, yeah, she was
I just had gotten a
classified
lot of
before. Yeah.
feedback regarding us getting rid of those positions, and I just
Well,
want to state,
and again-
this is the payment of those same positions but moved over.
Right. It's a process. When the grant ends, we have to show the grant that we've ended those positions and then put them into our budget, which we have done. Those positions are not going away. They're just, instead of federal money, it's Willits money now.
Local money.
Right.
Paula?
The $13,000 for retirement per teacher, can you break that down a little for me, please?
Yeah, when somebody retires, it's not 13, it's what, 9,
Should be closer to
9,000.
7.
Yeah, it's around 9,000. And so,
And that's
whether they're
the-
getting cash in lieu or health care. So, when those people retire, there's a long time payout of cash that's not calculated in that.
Okay, it varies if they retire, because some of your retirees will be 65. Their payout is only about $350 a month, and that's all it costs the district, or a little less because they go directly to Social Security. If they're paid out before that, it runs about $7,200. So
Well,
probably you're.
Depends on the age, depends on the
Right.
person, and we have to budget as if it's a max payout. I mean, that's how we have to budget it.
Okay,
We can't do it by individual because we never know who's retiring until the end of the year.
Exactly, so your highest, or your worst case scenario, or whatever you're saying is about $9,000, you think? Is that, I mean, you use
Linda will know the
13.
answer to that, she does,
I know.
what is the retirement benefit, Linda?
The maximum benefit that the district would pay out would be $11,120
For
for the
continued
maximum
benefit.
benefit. Right.
Right.
That would be the maximum.
Yeah.
Right. That's the cost of the healthcare package.
Right.
It
You
it
don't
depends
pay
on
them.
each person.
Right.
Okay, so where are we in the presentation? Let's get back to that.
So I think
Yeah.
I think we covered the certificated, so classified, no major changes. As I said, I'll be doing more review on that before estimated actuals. And under benefits and taxes, just informationally, as you go through each of the years, I've listed out what those STRS and PERS rates, you can see that, they're going up each year, and that is definitely a major area of concern for me, because the state as of yet has not indicated that they will be providing any additional assistance related to that. So it's definitely on districts to fit that in, and it's pretty substantial.
I just went to a conference in Sacramento on small schools, and the STRS and PERS presentation was exactly what they had projected. The numbers that Tanya had up on her board, that Nikki still has on her board, are still in line. That's actually statutory, those increases. So if they were gonna reduce those rates, they'd have to statutorily reduce them.
And at this point, in fact, it seems the trend is going the other way, because they've done some review about the assumptions that they used for their actuarials, and they are concerned that they're still way under the mark. And so, I mean, there is discussion now about, I think they recently increased the PERS ones even more, and they're just discussing whether the STRS will follow.
Yeah, I mean, didn't they were projecting like a 7% return, and they dropped it to 6.5 or something like that.
Right.
Exactly.
And if you could get a 6.5 return, I mean, the Chase Bank doesn't get that.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, even the adjusted version is still pretty optimistic, so.
So they're trying to do it gradually.
Yeah, they're trying to step into it, I think, to
Right.
try and.
And because their return rate's not high enough, what they're doing is they're tacking the district of 1.85
Right.
and the employee 1. So they're hitting both the employee and the employer on top of, that they're not getting the return they need. And so they're trying to make the system solvent. I have to be honest, most states have this problem, because when they put these retirement programs together, it used to be something called interest. And that doesn't really exist anymore. And so they were always counting on interest incomes and all that stuff that don't exist now.
They just raised the Fed rate again
Yeah.
for the third time in the last 10 years, and so we're starting to see some inflation. We might see inflation in the next 4 years.
Yeah. And again, it's rising cost. It's rising cost on employee, employer. It's, they're trying to keep the system solvent.
So are you done with the assumptions?
Well, I had a few more, but are you I don't need to go through every single line.
Right,
item
yeah, I
if you
mean, I
want me
think,
to.
I think we're gonna go through this really carefully, but I do appreciate that they're set out in a way that they're understandable. I don't find that that's the way, I had a hard time finding the assumptions in the prior interims. But, what is your intention, is it to go through this entire document, or?
No,
Oh,
not the
okay.
whole thing.
Good.
I was really just
Are you
looking
gonna
at
stay for that?
Alex
Chris?
has
these 2 pages.
Are you
Don't worry,
staying?
I'll
We
go
have
through it
dinner
all.
coming, no.
So I do want to get to this, there's these checklist
Oh,
pages.
criteria and standards?
Well, it looks like this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, so that summarizes the criteria and standards.
And those are sort of required by the Department of Education. But one thing I had here is this ADA to retirement to enrollment. We didn't meet the ratio, and I'm concerned about that. I thought that we were conservatively budgeting ADA.
Let's take what number is that?
Number 3.
Well, we could balance the budget by just saying we think we're gonna get 500 more kids next year.
So, for that criteria, what they have done is they have looked at the prior 3 years
Right.
and compared that and come up with an average. And in 15-16, it looks like the ratio was much lower. It was 87.7. The 2 prior to that was 92.1 and 92.5. So I believe that 87.7 was an anomaly. It pulled that ratio, the standard down.
Okay.
And therefore, now that we're projecting something more close to what our normal is, it's saying, oh, you've fallen outside this standard. But we missed it. Let's see, they're saying that the average that we need to meet is 91.3, and we're at 91.4. It's not an area of concern to me, and
Sure.
I believe that we,
Okay,
it's just to do with the way that math
okay.
played out.
So this is probably one of the most, this is the couple sheets that tell us probably the most of how honest our budget is.
And that's what I look at, and I look at the assumptions, and I go through and see, when Nikki and I sit down and talk about this, I'm always looking at the plus minus difference.
Right.
You know, why did something go up, why did something go down?
And so, just so everyone knows, I did include the criterion standards. This page that you were looking at with the checklist summarizes and just pulls only that part of the data over. But for more information, everybody has the criteria and standards, and anything where we don't meet the criteria, we're required to provide an explanation, so there is more detail for each thing that is not met.
It's not in here, but it's available?
It's in the back of it's in
Oh.
the very back of the packet.
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, all right,
Yeah, those match to a page in the back.
all right, so,
So you're gonna give us an analyzation at the next meeting, right?
I am.
I believe it.
I think, first of all, I would like to sort of understand what the schedule is now. Whether the third interim is due at sometime in the first part of May?
We're not required to do a third interim. That is typically only required
That's for the bad boys?
if you file qualified or negative, I believe.
Okay.
So we are filing positive. So the next thing that you will see come forward will be when we do the budget adoption for 17-18. It will include estimated actuals for 16-17 and budget for 17-18.
Okay. So,
And that's where we want to get together.
when do we think, what's the sort of the schedule for that?
So
I know it's difficult, but I mean, last year, you know, they said they couldn't give us actual numbers until, you know, May 28th, and, you know, and then they told us we had to adopt the budget by June 5th or something, and it just wasn't enough time for the public or the
Right.
board to get, and it wasn't necessarily anybody's fault, it just was, I mean, it just seems like the system screwed up, and I just want to know if it's going to be screwed up again this year.
we will make every effort to get it to you with enough time to review it and for people to ask questions. One of the nice things about the changes that happened when LCFF came into place is that the first meeting, you have the public hearing, and then you have a second meeting for the adoption. So at the public hearing, if people have further questions, there's time in between those meetings before you do the actual adoption. It is challenging because the state is, they don't release those numbers until we're pretty much approving everything. So we do our very best work to project what we think it will be.
Is there less likelihood of material variance this year than last year or the year before because we're in this sort of the third or fourth year of LCF?
Yeah, I think people are starting to get into the rhythm of LCFF as well. We have the same administrator. When you change an administrator, they look at the LCAP and they review the items there and if they need to make changes and things. So I think that we should have a fairly smooth process going into next year.
I think the question where we're headed is it possible in May to have a work session to do a budget analysis of what we want to have in the 17-18 budget?
And so between now and May, this is the document we should be studying so
Right.
that when we get to the next document, we can find the variances from this, and I'm hopeful. I mean, will we get the kind of information that says, all right, you got a second interim on March 15th, the Ides of March, and here it is, May 15th, and everything's pretty much the same as it was in March, or here are the big things that changed, and here's why.
Are you asking if you would receive something else prior to?
Well, we're hoping we're gonna have a bit of a budget workshop at some point.
Right.
That we can help set the
And
priorities with
that if
respect
we
to the
spend a
budget.
lot of time with this document, that when we have documents in front of us for the budget workshop, that we can, after we've figured out this document, we can determine whether there's been any major changes to the assumptions or to the performance of this so in other words, the budget sometimes says, all right, here's what you budgeted for in May or June of 2016, and here's what, here's where you are, and here's what the difference is.
So you would like to maybe see some more comparatives between budget development this last go-round and now, as opposed to right now where we're just looking at first interim to second interim?
My impression was that last year's budget was pretty much just, should have been over in the fiction department instead of the nonfiction. But this year, I'd like to see, so comparing back to the budget really is not, it looks like, when you say, when you get to the $64 question, you say that we were projecting it in second interim an unrestricted ending balance of $3.4 million, and we've now gone through almost the school year, and it's now projected at $3.5 million. Then it looks like what was being told to us in September bore much more relationship to reality than what was being presented in the budget last year. So I'm just saying that now that I've got this, I understand that, I think the presentation is a little much better than we've seen before, just glancing at it. But now that we've got this, I want to spend some time on this, and then when I see the new documents, I want to be able to find out, not only compare to last year's budget, but to compare to this.
So one of the things that may help is when you are in the general fund form 01, it does include original budget. It has board approved operating budget, which in this case was first interim, and then it has the projected year totals, which is second interim.
Okay.
It does not calculate the variances from original budget. It only does it from the first interim to second interim, but it does show you those amounts that were budgeted at original budget. If you would like any more detail on those types of comparatives, I have other reports that I can run, from my software.
If
as
it's
well.
possible, I'd kind of like to see what the variance is. Although I can look at one number and another number and, come pretty close to drawing a conclusion. But the variances, like if you get down to the bottom and you say the average variance is,
3.1, you know, then we're gonna say, well, that's pretty good, you know, the average variance is 27.3, you know, we're gonna say, you know. So that's really, I think that for the amount of our expertise on the budget, that's sort of like the more aides we have, the better off, you know, we are. But so I assume you're done with your presentation, and we'll see if we have any public comment,
Yeah,
board
let's
comment.
A couple quick questions. The 2018-19 multi-year projection, are contractual obligations in terms of certificated and are all those contractual obligations factored into the 2018-19? The reason why I ask that is because I see 2017-18 for certificated salaries combined as actually being a little bit less in 2018-19 than in 2017-18, which looks odd to me.
I'm maybe not seeing.
Expenditures
For the combined unrestricted and restricted?
correct.
I think what I'm looking at is that in 17-18, we're showing 7,232,000.
Oh, I'm sorry, it does go 7.3.
Yeah, and one thing that does make a difference though between those 2 years for certificated is that we have the educator effectiveness block grant that came through, and that was something that was set for districts to have 3 years to spend it. And we originally had showed that we would be doing a lot of those expenditures in this year, and now we're pretty late in the year and not a lot of that has happened. And so I actually, for this year, tightened that up and took those expenditures out, put those in the restricted fund balance. We're showing those expenditures in 17-18, and then that expenditure comes back out because it's a one-time expenditure from 18-19, and that's $88,000. So that's a big chunk that you'll see change between those 2
Okay,
years.
and then one more part that would be valuable to me is when we talk about the unassigned fund balance, especially in the multi-year projections, it starts out, this year it ends at 1.5, next year it ends at 1.2, and we're projecting again in 2018-19, probably an unrealistic number, but only $500,000. What would be more important to me is I'd like to know how much of that unassigned balance is recurring funds. In other words, how much of it is one-time money and how much of it is money that we're going to be able to see, anticipate coming in year after year?
Well,
I don't know if you can do
so
that.
I think the answer to that is that when you're looking at fund balance, you're always looking at a one-time fund. When we're looking at the revenue, that's where we start looking at, is it a one-time revenue or an ongoing revenue? But when you look at the fund balance, that is just money that is sitting and continues across to various years.
That carryover.
The same money.
Right.
Yes, so I think the very nature of that is that it is one time.
So if we spent this unassigned 1.5, we wouldn't see this carry on down the line. There'd be
Correct.
nothing past it, because there's no.
Correct.
It's your savings account.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to make a decision on what you want to keep that at. And, you know, the assumptions that we're going on are based on, you know, when you ask about 18-19 and 17-18, that's not including any type of increase. We figured CSEA in, but we have not with the WTA.
CSEA is not reflected in this,
Oh.
but we have looked at it.
We've looked at it.
It's not in this report.
But we know that number, and so this doesn't include the WTA. So we have to, you know, we're assuming it's not gonna grow from this. But again, what I think we wanna do is we wanna sit down and talk about priorities, because we have no shortage of priorities. We gotta make 2 contracts work for both sets of employees. We have technology. We know we have transportation issues like student vans and buses.
Do you have any
and-
maintenance issues?
Yeah, we have some real serious structural issues that we have to look at in our facilities. You know, those are things we have to set aside money and prioritize. And so that's what we're trying to do. I'm trying to do the school improvement things we need to do, put enough staff in place to do it, but also not do nice to do's. We're not in a nice to do mode. we're in a fix and repair mode until we get adjusted to fix what we have to fix. We need a, just like in transportation, you need a revolving transportation fixes. We have the same thing in facilities. I mean, we are literally limping the Titanic's boiler along in this building. And, you know, at some point, it's not gonna happen and we're gonna have to fix that. Okay? That's a fixable problem. It's not a catastrophe. But there are other places just like that.
So, do we have any other board comment? Do we have any public comment, John?
Well, looking at this, $4,047,000 in reserve, the ending fund balance. So what percent is that?
I'm sorry, can you tell me again where you're looking?
Well, I'm looking at the ending fund balance for the second interim.
Oh, the
And
combined.
that number we were talking about earlier.
Got it.
That's the 4 million.
You know, I don't have that calculated right now. Mainly, I think we don't normally automatically calculate that only because the restricted balance is so different than the unrestricted balance. It's usually very program specific, you know, so we have Medi-Cal funds or Title I or something like that. And so this, you know, it does combine unrestricted and restricted into that combined number. But when it comes to fund balance, I don't usually automatically look at them as like one combined thing. If you guys need that percentage, I can get that for you. But the 7.07%, that's referring to just the unrestricted side. The unrestricted reserve for economic uncertainty.
But you get the 7.07 from the unassigned?
No, the 7.07 is just the reserve for economic uncertainty.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so if we look at $4 million and our budget is 18, 19 million, right? That seems to me, is doing a little simple math, that it's over 20%.
Yes, my concern though is that we are dwindling this reserve down at a pretty rapid rate. And so, I mean, we're certainly not at 20% when we get, if this were to all happen without making other changes, you know, that doesn't leave a lot of room for error there.
And like I said, it's not a recurring, it's not money that's gonna come every
Right.
year. I mean, this is a
Right.
one-time chunk that we're slowly spending away already.
But what we've seen is we went from last year where we were going to be taken over by the state. You remember those times?
We fended that off and
yeah.
they really didn't want us because we were in such bad
That
economic
was
shape.
close. But then we went up to 2.1 million in reserve, and now we're looking at over 4 million in reserve. But the
1.3.
future certainly looks bad. So that's right. But at the same time, you know, we've got a crisis in our district, and it's not just the roofs, and it's not the band. It's a crisis of our staffing. And when I go to tell these people what the district is offering in negotiations, and when I go tell them what is in reserve now, that it's going to be very hard to retain some of these people. You heard this Jordan West just talking earlier. You know, we're having a hard time attracting teachers as it is. You know, we've got math teachers we need to hire, we've got special ed, we've got psychologists, we've got we've got a teacher shortage, and our salary schedule is not attracting teachers. And when we tell them what the district is offering in negotiation, we're having teachers who are saying, you know, I can do better down the road in Cloverdale. We had a teacher last year who's getting 13,000 more in Cloverdale. You know, they can go to Lake County and get a lot more money. And so we have a crisis going on. And I hope that the board takes these numbers into consideration, because it's demoralizing for our membership when the district is playing the reindeer games that they're playing with the money, and we are not getting what, is respectable, and this is a hiring season for teachers.
Well, let me ask a question back real quick,
Well,
because you're
when we
using
go
our
to-
reserve.
hold- Let me just finish.
Sure.
When we go to job fairs, you know, Laura Sleeper is not able to attract a lot of people because of our salary schedule. And so, you know, it's something for the board to consider.
And John,
Let me ask
Go
the
ahead.
question
Sure.
back real quick. So
Okay.
you're using our reserve, saying we should use that to pay our teachers, but how do we pay them next year? If we take our reserve and we use it to bring in more people, my question back to you is, what is your plan then for the years after that, when we no longer have a reserve and there's no more money coming in?
And
Where
it
does that money
keeps
come from?
multiplying every year with steps on top of it.
But even
Right,
if
so
they
that's,
just
I
stayed the
guess that's
same.
my question, what's your plan? What do you tell them we're gonna do once we drain our reserve?
Well, when we see that the reserve is continually increasing.
It's
each
not.
year, It is, well, the projections aren't, but the reality is the unaudited actuals show that we've been increasing, and now we're saying we're at over $4 million.
and I think
But
the
let's
one thing that's a
project
little
out
bit
we-
different than, is I think this number here, and I'm very satisfied, at least initially. I mean, I think that what we're dealing with here is a real number. So in the past, I think that what's been done is that the real number hasn't been trotted out. But this looks to me, and I'm gonna be surprised if this isn't the real number. Once we have the real number, then we can have that process of developing our priorities. And certainly, the priority of retaining teachers and the certificated group is one of the big factors on that page of priorities. But I've felt the last 3 years that I never really knew what this real number was. And it was really hard to develop those priorities. So I think that you're actually pointing out exactly what we're gonna have to do. We're gonna have to do the same thing I do in my home budget, take $5 and figure out a way to spend 10. Because 10 is what we really need to spend. But I think the good news is that you're getting I think we're getting real numbers now.
And I'll help you with a couple of teacher recruitment things. I went with Laura to Humboldt. We have 6 interviews from Humboldt. We're not having a hard time recruiting. If you look at our compensation, total compensation for teachers, we're the highest in our area, except for Fort Bragg by about that much. But I'll help clarify some things. I'll put out a public statement about where we're at, and so all the teachers and everybody can know where we're at, because I think that's important, because we want transparency in this. We don't want behind the closed door, we're gonna tell them something and rabble-rouse them. We'll put some real numbers out there and some real stuff for them to look at, and I'll be glad to do that.
Paul?
I will too.
Paula?
I have about 3 questions. One of them is, it's on the front of the thing, the front of this report that talks about the $4 million, okay? And that reserve, if it comes from the economic uncertainties money, that is part of the revenue that comes in every single year. So what's always handy is when you have that savings account and you don't have to dip into it, because then you don't need to replenish it at the beginning of the following year. So that reserve can always stay there, and it comes right off of the top of any incoming money, or it's not really carryover because you don't spend it, and it just sits there like your home bank account that is never touched. So that isn't the part that would dwindle. I think the part that would dwindle is the unassigned, and it came from the initial revenues that come in. The revenues that come in, I know you know this, I don't mean it to sound this way, but I mean, it's like based on ABA, ours has been kind of stable for a change. And what happens is you always get whatever you earn this year, or you get what you got next year, which is always, hopefully, higher. And if it's not, at least you're guaranteed whatever you had the year before. So setting up your budget is not like a surprise. It's like you're either gonna make the same $20 you made last year, or you're gonna make $22 or whatever it is. So that part of it is already a given or a guarantee because it's already a part of the budget. It's not like this is one-time funding that we call part of the budget and then say, okay, I bought that big bus and now my one-time funding is gone. Those two blocks are supposed to come from constant, similar revenue every single year. Okay, so that's a part of it that's sometimes real confusing, you know. The other thing is that my understanding is that the salary schedules that went out to the new people at the job fair in Humboldt, and I've only sort of checked, I mean, I've only talked to one person that I think is coming here, so I'm not positive, you know, they don't understand the salary schedule maybe, but what it showed me was that still had the in-service days or professional development days on it, and there seems to be a question within the district, teachers at any rate, whether or not those days are still gonna be on there. That was one of the enhancements that was done a couple of years ago to make the beginning salary look a little better than it really was, because there were 3 additional days. Part of the issue with Ukiah is that they have 6 additional days on their salary schedule over ours, so over Willits, so basically it does look like they make a lot more money. And they do, they make 3 to 6 days more money.
And pay $6,800 for their insurance.
That's true, and when you get down to the thousands, it balances nicely if you're brand new, and you really make money if you're not. I studied their stuff just because it fascinates me. And so that's one of the issues when you go and you get brand new recruits, so to speak, to come to the district. If they think they're gonna make 38 to start, and when they really do start, it's 35, they don't stay, they have to go.
They start at 38. They started with the salary.
Oh, okay, and so then what that's saying, just to clarify for me, is that the professional development days are still on there?
The salary schedule is what it is. There's 185 work days and there's
Okay.
a starting pay.
Well, that was good. What I understood from a number of people was that it went back to 182 and those 3 days would be added later. Okay, well, that's good. Oh, we can erase that thing. And then the last thing that I just had some concerns with is that, as some of you really know, every single year that they do a budget, that the budget is done, third-year projections were in the hole. I mean, it's a given. You can just trust that every single time. And this time, the district is not in the hole, which makes you figure that since we really haven't been in the hole those last few years, probably chances are pretty strong that this ending is going to be greater than what we even have on the paper.
Hopefully.
Well, exactly. And so, and that was one of the things that I was hoping that, even though I don't get to ask for stuff, one of you might like to ask for, is that when the budget is done, it's sort of like when you buy a jacket, it's supposed to cost you $25 and get it on sale for $15. Will that $10 show up somewhere else so you can say, oh, so all right, this is why we're above? Or do you just say, yeah, I lucked out, we don't need to discuss the $10, you know, and that's just the
So
last thing.
I tried to be very clear in the
You were real
assumptions
good.
that discuss any of the, any of the basis for where these numbers have
Mhm.
come from.
Yeah,
So,
that's
and going forward, we would always see that. We should easily be able to say, well, here's what we assumed at this point in time, here's what actually happened, or here's what we're assuming now. I mean, we should always be able to do that type of comparison.
well, that's really good. Thank you.
Nikki, it was very well done.
Yeah, I gotta compliment you. I mean, just from what I've seen here, this looks like this is gonna be something that's gonna be valuable for me to go through.
I would like to say one thing. I mean, I know we've discussed a bit tonight the issue of, what things look like when we're projecting it, where do we end up. I definitely believe that I had to be somewhat conservative in some parts of this year's budget because I don't know everything about what's happening yet. So I tried to tighten things up as much as I could, but, please don't hold that against me when we come to estimated actuals and closing, because truly I have spent the last 2 months scouring everything I possibly can and being as realistic and reasonable as I can, but there are things out there that I'm not sure about yet, and it takes a little while to get acquainted with, the more variable parts of the budget. There's a lot of fixed parts of the budget that are fairly easy. People are placed on the salary schedule, we know what that is, we know what the percentages of statutory benefits will be against those things. But when we start getting into areas of, how much extra duty time do we need? How much maintenance cost are we going to be facing? Those are tough areas to get into in a new budget. I don't know the trends here, and so I just did my very, very best on that stuff.
Thank you. That all makes sense. So do we have a motion to?
I'll make the motion to accept.
I'll second.
Any board discussion? Okay, call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? So, the last item on the agenda, oops, we got Alex, I'm gonna excuse you if you'd like to leave. I know you had a 6:30 appointment.
I think we're pretty much done, aren't we?
Public comment, any public comment left? Okay, the meeting is,
Do I make a motion to adjourn?
I'll second it.
Aye.
Thank you all for coming.
Chris, I need to get your signature, please.